All right, welcome to Startup Nation, episodes 15 and 16. This is Nate and my good friend Brenda. So Brenda is my business banker, but also a great friend of mine. She works for Chase Bank. She basically runs her own business within Chase Bank, 10 million in revenues a year. She has 12 business bankers and thousands of clients and has 30 years of banking experience. So I've had a lot of questions recently from people regarding Startup Nation and how they get loans, the best way to get loans, they want to pay taxes, how do they get funding, how do they grow. So I have the solution. We're going to have Brenda here talk a little bit about it today because it's stuff I've had to learn the hard way throughout the years of my business, and I think you'll learn a lot. So stay tuned, episode 14, 15. Say hello, Brenda.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. I'm actually a huge fan of Motivation Nation. I work with small business owners all the time, and so I just love watching you spotlight them and showcase what they're doing and the struggles that they're having. So thank you for inviting me today.
No problem. So on episode 15 today, we're going to talk first, we're going to have two episodes with Brenda. The first one's going to be about the importance of having a relationship with your banker. It's probably one of my biggest downfalls, but also some things I've learned. And then the reality of understanding how you want to position yourself as what most people do, which is the sweat equity of starting a business where you don't have a ton of cash. And then once you get to a certain point where your cash basically runs out and you need to start relying on lending to be able to substantiate additional growth. So I'll give a real quick story about Green Guard, and then I'm going to have Brenda give some stories on her own and then some ideologies on the importance of having a relationship with your banker. So for me, we've been through 2 or 3 banks. We actually left Chase, to be completely honest, at one point. And it was a number of years, primarily because, again, I was kind of ignorant to the fact that we had a CPA at the time we needed some money to continue to grow. And that CPA was overly aggressive on our taxes to a point where we showed noticeable losses the first few years. What happened then is all of a sudden you go to Chase, or really any bank for that matter, and they're like, well, what the hell are we going to lend you money? You're not showing any profits or even breaking even. And so, I was obviously quite upset with that. We clearly figured it out, but the reality was that we didn't position ourselves right. I didn't have a relationship with Chase at the time, outside of just kind of knowing the guy that was there, but really didn't get to know him. And then we ended up going to another bank that was willing to give us a little bit of money to help us grow. But long story short is years later, we're looking to now going back with Chase, and eventually we're going to get we're planning on getting rid of our big 7A loan, so we don't have a lot of things collateralized. I prefer not to have all my houses on the line. And knowing Brenda, now I'm starting to build relationships. She's starting to educate me on the importance of all the different metrics associated with how you qualify for loans. We can get a little bit into that today when it comes about personal and global debt ratios, things like that. And you really want to have that relationship with the bank. Luckily, I never officially left Chase in the sense of personally, so I've been with the bank myself, and I even actually worked at who you guys purchased, Washington Mutual, for a couple years. So it's been 20 years in some capacity I've been with them. So it's going to help out with Green Guard for the long term, specifically when it comes to even purchasing a building like this or continuing to grow. And so tell me a little bit about yourself, the importance of what you've learned over the last 30 years, and the importance of understanding the relationship with a banker and that type of thing, versus just, because I know a lot of people are like, well, you just apply for a loan and get it, right? Like a car or something, right? Yeah. Where it's drastically different when you're talking about owning your own business, in my opinion. Yeah,
no, it's, I've been in banking for 30 years. I first started as a commercial real estate underwriter right out of college, and then I went to grad school for a few years, and I ended up getting into a intensive 3-year bank training program, which was a lot of fun and a lot of hard work. And I worked on the large corporate side, so I was working with Fortune 500 companies. Okay. And working in that environment, you're competing with 25 other banks. You have a syndicate of banks. Everybody's fighting over all of the ancillary products and services that we sell. You're fighting over a basis point. So I did that for about 10 years, and then I actually went into the wealth management side for 5 years. ended up getting an opportunity down here in San Marcos with a small startup bank. And the guy looked at me and he's like, oh, you did construction loans 15 years ago? You can be my construction loan girl. So I started, and that was my entree into small business. And what I realized was it was a lot of fun. I actually get to build relationships with people and help them fund their dreams. So we're not fighting over a basis point anymore. Obviously, we have to have value, and we like to be a resource, but we actually get to be a partner to that.
Wasn't all numbers based.
Yeah. So I mean, I work with businesses. We work with businesses right from startup all the way up to about 20 million or so in revenues, and then from there they get graduated up to our middle market team. And some of the the beauty of working with Chase is that you can start as a baby mom and pop operation, and you can go all the way to a publicly traded company with the same bank, never having to change that relationship. But what we've learned over the years is that when people start up the business, so there's kind of two different ways that you can go. As a startup, you're passionate about something. Maybe you're starting in your garage, you're using your life savings to get it going. There's that route versus coming up with a business plan and a marketing strategy and going out and finding investors. So I can't really help with the investor piece of it.
It's probably not as common though for most small entrepreneurs. So
yeah, I mean, it's the expensive thing about that is that you're actually giving up equity in your company, and you're giving up control. But it's a faster launch. So if you have an idea that's going to go right to 100 million or $1 billion in sales, that's the direction you got to go. But for the majority of the people throughout the country that are starting up a small business, they're doing it because they have a passion about something. And they want to do it their way. Maybe they've worked in an environment for 15 years and they've learned a lot, and now they know how to do it and they want to do it their way. So just a couple of things that we find with startups is initially you're kind of leery of bankers. So you talk to your banker and they say, well, we want 3 years of financial statements. We want to understand everything, all the ins and outs about who you are, what you do, what your competitive advantages are, what's happening in the economy. And I just have a really quick story. So my husband is a college professor. He teaches psychology here in San Marcos and then at UCSD. And he, for his midlife crisis, decided to pick up the drums, and he's now a professional drummer. He plays, in local bars and stuff like that. So it's just a hobby business. But we decided that he should get a business credit card to track all of his expenses associated with it. So he applies for the credit card, and we kind of made the mistake, like we put his annual revenues at like 15,000, because it's just a hobby, right? But his work that he does that pays for that business, right? Like he has the income to afford. It's like he's never going to make a profit on it. But because he put this $15,000 down, even though he has like a 850 credit score, they gave him like a $5,000 card. And he's like, well, I can't even buy a drum kit with that.
What is this
not to mention, sound equipment and, all of that. So I'm like, well, call the bank and, just ask them if they would reconsider. So I was listening to him, and he got on the phone and he started talking to them, and he's like giving them one-word answers. So they're like, well, where do you play? Like, how do you get your business? Like, who comes to your events? And he's just giving them these short, one-word answers. And they talked to him for like 45 minutes. Wow. And he was giving them nothing, like literally giving them nothing. So in the end, he got stuck with a $5,000 card. But he got off the phone and he looked at me and he's like, oh my God, I feel so violated. And I just started laughing at him because this is like a classic example. Like that banker was trying to find the ammunition to get to yes. And so when you submit a loan package at a bank, what happens is that loan package goes to, some underwriter. In our case, it's in Dallas. And they go through the financials and they crunch the numbers and they say, okay, here's what you qualify for. But if you had spent the time with your banker and gave them that's a black and white picture, right? So if you give them the color behind it, like they gotta understand what's driving the numbers and what's happening with it. And if you invite them into your life and talk to them about what your passion is, what your goals are, where you're going with it, why this happened, why you invested this amount. So maybe you lost money last year, but you spent $300,000 on a software system that is going to help you ramp up to 3 million, and your interim numbers are already showing that happening, something along those lines. So that's why it's really critically important to have that relationship with somebody that wants to help you get there and wants to help you finance.
I think my suggestion on that too would be kind of twofold. You definitely want your banker to know you. I've had the experience that I've had bankers that tend, that industry as a whole, historically people tend to bounce around to banks a lot. So you want to find a banker that's maybe a little bit more established and that was really going to take interest in your business. Similar to like Brenda has been doing this a long time, and our actual banker Will is 15 years or so with Chase, right?
Yeah.
And so that being said, clearly they're a little bit more loyal to that specific bank. And so that'll create a lot more value for you. And at that point, if you feel like there's a good match, because it's not going to be nearly the marriage it would be with a business partner in the same business, but I can reassure you that banker's probably the second or third most important person that you're going to eventually want to know. And that's something I haven't really learned until the last year or two, right? Is that and our banker actually left Commerce West, which is who we were with before. And every single person that's been there since, which has been 2 or 3 people in the last year, has just been, you can't connect with them, right? They don't take interest. They're not asking you questions. They're not visiting your facility. They're not asking the intelligent, I'm actually interested type of questions. Yeah. And so then you start saying, okay, well, what's the point here? What are we really accomplishing? Especially if they're not holding any notes or anything. So, so for me, I think that's really important that you do that. You find who's a good fit with you, make sure that they have some established time there, and that you really start selling your business to them. Because at the end of the day, they're going to fight a lot harder for you, and they're going to have a lot more leverage internally with their business than if you sit there and try to say something. If you are, in her example, you're trying to get more on a credit card, or you're trying to get more, more for a loan, and they're going to be able to paint that picture a lot clearer than somebody that's not nearly as objective. Meaning, you as a business owner, right? Because clearly you're going to be biased towards saying, I'm not going to fail. What the hell? Screw them if they think I'm going to fail, right? It's like, well, obviously businesses fail. That's the nature of how the world turns. And so you're not going to have as much leverage as the banker, but the banker's not going to really want to put his or her neck out for you, because if they do that one too many times and the business fails, they're not going to be in banking very long, right? And so I think that's why it's so important to have a really strong banker that can fight for you.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of banks hire business development people, so those people are anxious to close the loan that you want, right? Mm-hmm. Like you want to buy a piece of property, like let's get this approved, let's get it done, and then they're done, and then they're gone, and you never hear from them again. So that's one of the beauties about Chase. Like, we're very client focused. And when you do a deal with somebody and help them purchase the loan or purchase a building or purchase some equipment or get a line of credit, whatever it is, that becomes your client for life. And we're responsible for, staying regularly in contact with them, visiting with them, constantly checking in to see how things are doing. And it's just really fostered this environment where we know that if we create a good experience for you, you're going to be continuing to grow with us and want to move everything else over. So that's kind of the key most important thing, I think, for a business relationship.
Yep. I think it's important. And again, that's something that even to this date, Green Guard's learning, we've got a lot better over the years, is that, clearly things like interest rates are important, terms of loans are important, which are going to always be really similar. But I've never understood people that, specifically in business, that are going to sit there and leave a bank over an interest rate over like, a 0.1% or 10 basis points, right? Because I get it. Like, I get the fact that if you look at that over a 5 or 10 or 15 or 20-year loan, that could be a few $1,000s. But on the other hand, it's like, if you want to play that game as a business owner, we all know we spend money in places we shouldn't spend money, right? We all know that. And so it's just a kind of a half-ass approach to sit there and say, well, it's like, how many times did you go to Starbucks last month? But you're going to bitch about spending $300 on Starbucks, but the $100 more you spend on interest is all of a sudden now the biggest issue? Yeah. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm by no means saying Chase is more expensive than other people when it comes to rates and everything else. What I'm simply saying is, I think that the value of that relationship's worth far more than nickel and dime in those relations, the interest rates or whatever it may be. Aside from the logistical issue of having, for example, this is really silly, but when we were a lot younger company, we were always having a point where our credit cards were really high, and they actually get high sometimes and go back down. But you would have to make a payment, and if you had your credit card with a different bank than your normal bank, making that payment could take 2 days to take effect, right? If you have the credit card with the same bank, specifically Chase, but I believe some other banks do this too, and you make the payment, that the available balance is available immediately. That sounds silly, but when you're a small business, the cash flow is everything. It's a 2-day difference, and 2 days is pretty damn important. I can't tell you how many restaurants my company services where every they're so cash tight that every single day what they bill is what's important to them, and then when they process credit cards, they have to have the money that very next day, otherwise it's going to cause problems, right? And it's the same thing with most businesses, right? And so those little things that people don't realize that create a lot of value for working with banks, and they'll educate you with that. So tell me a little bit about either some stories from experiences you've had with people that maybe have come to Chase or in the bank you've worked for, and maybe some of the bad experiences they've had, or some of the things that they think people would learn relative to the importance of a business relationship with a bank.
Well, I mean, obviously it's a competitive world out there, and we do lose business for competitive reasons and for pricing and stuff like that. But I'll just give one quick example. Like, I had a client that we worked really hard to get to know, and we brought their business over to Chase. They're a contractor.
Okay.
So contractors are typically on a pay when paid basis, right? Like, they have subcontractors, and when they get paid, they pay their subcontractors. So they don't have a huge need for liquidity or lines of credit, because they can carry that float until their subcontractors.
They're not having to pay in advance,
Right. Mm-hmm. But that's not always the case. But that's typically one thing that we'll do with contractors. We'll look at, like, okay, how much do they have in receivables and how much do they have in payables? And if there's some room in there, we'll finance that difference. But when let's say you're a contractor that is seasonal, like maybe you build schools or something along those lines, right? So the bulk of your work is going to be over the summer, and the period when you're going to need your line of credit is going to be before you have the receivable.
Exactly.
If your receivables are kind of ongoing and even, there's always going to be availability, but like if it's a ramp up. So he actually left the bank and went to a smaller community bank that was able to give him that service. But he just called me yesterday, and this is probably 6 years ago, and like, he's looking to buy a business. His business has grown, and he's offset some of his businesses so that he doesn't have so much of the seasonality in the business anymore. So he's doing other things during the rest of the year, and it's now going to work, and he knows that Chase is the place that he needs to be because of the technology and our platform, and just how close that we got to him. And so, like, that's just something that's fun for me, because of the fact that we put so much into knowing him and building that friendship, like, he's circling back to us,
which is the importance of having that, right? Not just getting the deal done and moving on.
Yeah. So I mean, sometimes there are going to be times where you got to do what you got to do to get where you got to get. But, we can talk about some of the things that you can do early on as a business owner, just like you were saying, like to, create financials that mean something, that makes sense, that make you bankable. Like, if you want to talk about the most expensive thing that you could do is not show profits, right? Like, yes, you're going to pay taxes, but you're not going to pay as much in taxes, but you're really just pushing them off a year. Like, if you don't show profits this year, they're going to show up next year, right? So it's like a 1-year savings on it. But as a result of that, you end up being, so we risk grade clients. So if you're super strong and you have a lot of net worth in your business and you're profitable, like, you're going to be risk graded up here. And if you're bleeding your company and taking huge distributions and showing losses and not paying taxes, you're going to be down here. And guess what? Your interest rate's going to be way higher. So you're going to end up paying, or you're not going to get the financing that you need. So you really want, like, to have a strategy in place where you're showing your profits, and it doesn't have to necessarily be on the tax returns, but showing your profits so that you can, get the capital you need and get it at a rate that makes sense.
So we'll talk a lot more about that in episode 16. But one of the things that Green Guard did that really hurt us for a few years was we were overly aggressive with our taxes, and we didn't file them correctly, and we didn't realize that you needed 2 or 3 years of returns based on the size of loans you're looking for. And so we basically were misadvised as a young entrepreneur by a CPA to do things this way. Clearly we didn't know we were going to grow to the size, but because of that, it definitely delayed the growth. And so, and now knowing that, we could probably be in a different position than we are today. Happy where we're at, but it's hopefully we can give some advice on episode 16 on that. So a little bit more about the business banking side of it. I noticed is that if you have bankers that are really involved in understanding your business, they're going to ask a lot more questions about specifics, right? They're not going to just say, what's your accounts receivables, what's your revenue? They're going to actually get to know things like how you build your business, how you grow your business, how you get new clients, how do you retain them, what your retention is. I mean, when Brenda and I were talking a lot about the fact that Green Guard, for example, is specifically based on contracts, right? And so even though you can't necessarily put like a specific quantification or number or value to that, it's going to probably be a lot more valuable to Chase, I would presume, at least from the, hey, I'm a Chase banker, I'm going to pitch this to Dallas, because we know that our contracts are essentially, people have to sign them and they have to perform our service because it's required and all that stuff. And we can prove that our retention is extremely high. And so that is a lot more valuable from just a safe place for a bank than it would be from, like, say, a mechanic shop where you're a mechanic and you're not quite sure if you're going to have people coming in the next month, right? Yep. And so at the end of the day, the numbers still have to be the numbers. You still have to show profit. You still have to do that. But spending the time getting to know your banker and explaining those things in detail versus, like what her husband was just giving one-word answers like, how do you grow your business? We sell to clients, right? Well, how do you lose clients? No, we don't, right? Things like you want to be a little bit more specific than that, especially at our size, and because then they can really get to understand it. And then the reality is they know you're really passionate about it. Clearly, he is as well. But his, as she mentioned, a hobby business. But we really want to expand your business to where it needs to be. Educate them on it, right? It's. I was like that at the very beginning, like, why the hell do they need to know all this information? What the freaking nosy? Like, they need to know about, like, my wife's birthday, and they need to know where I live and all the crazy stuff. Like, you have life insurance and stuff. You're just like, what? Like, you want my blood next or what, right? But the reality is that they're asking those questions not to, that's one, it's the nature of the industry, agree with it or not, control what you can control. In the sense of this is what you're gonna have to give up. But on the other hand, they want to get to know you, and so stop making it such a transactional type of experience and get to know them as a person, and they're gonna really want to fight for you.
Yeah, and it's actually really fun. Like, have them come out to your place of business and show off what you do. Like, you've worked hard to build this. Like, show it off. Like, take them on a tour. Introduce them to your employees. Talk about, like, that was one of the things I was most impressed about you was when we went downstairs. Mm-hmm. And I saw all the things that you do for your employees to reward them. Like, they got a dirty job, mm-hmm. and they work late nights and get stinky dirty, and it's exhausting. And, but like, somebody gets to go on a cruise at the end of the year, and you have all these, games out there, refrigerator full of stuff, and you've got milestones that you recognize, and things that tells your banker that you care about your employees. And like, if we know you care about your employees, we know you care about your business. Mm-hmm. But also you can talk about the economy and what's happening in your industry, and I would even be okay with you asking them, have they done any industry research? Like, your banker should show up and know about what you do. They should have done some homework on your website, on your background, and we've got access to all kinds of stuff about what's happening in the industry. But being able to discuss what's happening in the industry and the economy, and kind of what your goals are and what your plans are, like what you're building.
So the main point of this story for episode 15, and I just want to reinforce this, and I wanted to bring a 30-year veteran to the table here with this, is that, and she's even taught me this. I'm still a young entrepreneur, right? And so I'm learning this stuff even as I go. Mind you, I was aware of it, but over the last few years, I've realized how much more important it is to make sure you're with the right bank. You're very transparent with everything. There should be no egos involved. They see everything and anything. So sitting there saying, oh, I'm super profitable, but then having a bunch of back-end expenses, things like that, they're going to know all that stuff. So it's just a matter of just explaining to them where you're at. They'll give you suggestions from a banker's perspective, and you're all on the same team, because the reality is if you're not growing, they're not growing, right? And so they have every single intention to want to help you, but you gotta be kind of an open book and make sure that they understand where you're at, what your plans are, and then make sure that it's a good fit for you too, right? Not every banker is going to be no different than any girlfriend or any boyfriend or any other relationship. relationship, right? The fact of the matter is they gotta care as much as you want to care, and if they don't, it might not be a good fit.
Yeah.
So
One, I mean, even if you're not at the point where you're ready for bank financing, it's still good to have a banker because they can coach you along the way of how to get there. And we can review financials. We can give you some of the things that you need to do to get there. And if it's not right now, it's sometime soon.
yeah, especially if you plan on growing it. And again, it's not like a hobby type of thing, right? You want to make sure that if you want to grow your business, and I'm not saying there's going to be exceptions to every rule, but I can almost guarantee you at some point you're going to need financing. You just are. Like yesterday, we had a freaking van that decided to melt the entire wires of our van and so it basically stopped running. Mind you, it had 280,000 miles on it, so it's finally just saying I give up, right? And so it was our original. Luckily, we have financing through Ford Credit, but eventually it's going to go through Chase. But we had to get an emergency truck to do that. But if you don't have that stuff set up, we would have literally lost $1,000 a night. Probably would have taken us 3 or 4 weeks to get it all figured out, and it could have been a $20,000 or $30,000 hit. Right? Not something I'm ready to screw with. So we have that prepared. So when that type of situation happens, we can handle it, right? And so to her point, were we planning on buying a truck? No. Am I happy about spending another $700 a month? No. But the reality is inevitable is going to happen, especially with a couple of vehicles with that type of mileage. And so we were prepared for it. And so having those types of things set up financing-wise is critical to the success of the business. So that is episode 15. Nate with Brenda here regarding just the importance of a business banker and the relationship you have with them. Stay tuned. Please like, subscribe, share, anything that would be really helpful for Startup Nation. And episode 16 coming up is going to be a lot more about the specifics regarding loans and growth and the details associated with that. So listen in.